Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as now it's time to drop some acid. And before you get worried, I am of course just referring to this rather striking new specimen, which is the latest offering from Make Toys, with their take on the Rainmaker known as Acid Storm. Now before we begin, I should mention that today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below. I'd also be very grateful if you could leave me a like for this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also in the description is a link to my Patreon, where in exchange for your support you can get access to a ton of perks, including exclusive galleries and early access to videos such as this. Finally, there's a link to my Redbubble store where you can pick up a huge range of different designs, including loads of my photos across all kinds of different merch. I'm uploading new ideas all the time, so be sure to check it out and treat yourself. Now here is Acid Swarm's box, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that it was actually yours truly who provided the promotional photography for this packaging. Although at the time I had no idea how the final product was going to turn out, of course. But I have to say I think it looks really rather good, as although the box keeps things relatively minimalist, it sort of stands out a bit more for it. I'm also a big fan of the way that it opens, as it lifts up to reveal some presentational paper with the clamshell inside, just like one of those fancy store gift wrap Christmas presents. Lovely stuff. Included with the box are a number of accessories, such as a pair of signature null rays, along with an extra pair of missile tips for use in the alternate mode, as well as a pair of translucent green blast effect pieces, and no less than 5 additional faces on top of the one in place already. Then of course you have the toy itself, which may be a familiar prospect to anyone who has owned the Make Toys Seeker mold before, but there's definitely one thing about this release that sets it apart. That green. Yes, it's all very eye-catching, with the colour scheme for Acid Swarm being more vibrant than you might even imagine, making this release stand out quite considerably versus the rest of your Masterpiece-style Decepticons. I really wasn't sure how it was going to turn out when this version was first mooted, especially as Seeker repaints can be a little bit underwhelming if not done right, but honestly I feel like Make Toys have crushed it on this occasion. It's definitely a bit of a different take on the character, who had a very distinct look during his one and only appearance in the Generation 1 cartoon in the episode Divide and Conquer. There, Acid Swarm was one of 3 Rainmakers, all of whom had the classic Cybertronian Tetrajet alternate forms, with their robot modes being distinctly block-coloured during the blink and you miss it moment they actually appear on the screen. That means that Make Toys have chosen to go a slightly different route for their version of the character, although it equally sets it apart from the unusual camouflage stylings of the Hasbro Masterpiece repaint of MP11 that we got for him back in 2013. Overall, I like what Make Toys have done, as the darker green sections look fab and add a welcome bit of contrast, as do the white highlights on areas such as the feet, thighs, forearms and abs. I'm also fond of the bright red stripes on the wings, which actually are very accurate to the cartoon, as is that rather lovely solid gold canopy adorning his chest. Make Toys have done a fine job with the head sculpt here too, which has always been great for this mold, although it arguably wasn't shown off to its best with how dark they made it on the initial Meteor release. Here it's moulded very sharply and makes the most of a much lighter grey with some piercing red eyes, allowing you to appreciate just how great it is with a lot less fluorescent light required. Of course you can swap out the faces should you wish, with Make Toys having provided a large range of additional options. Of the others available, I'd say the results vary a little in terms of how successful they are, with the smirk and shouty alternatives being the absolute best of the bunch, I think. In a strange twist, I couldn't fit the 3 darker faces into the head socket at all, as they're just too large, so that's a bit of a disappointment. Although I will say that they're not as nicely moulded as the lighter alternatives, so probably wouldn't have had much use from me anyway. In terms of other gimmickry, the null rays look every bit as imposing as you'd hope they would when mounted on Acid Swarm's biceps, and even feature a small adjustable arm inside, which equally allows you to place them loosely in his hands should you wish. It's not the most sturdy of solutions, but it's a decent enough approximation of how some Seekers have chosen to wield their weaponry in other cartoon episodes at least. Then there's those blast effect pieces, which pop on the end of the null rays and look pretty good with how they catch the light. Now in my box I had 2 of the neon green pieces, which is strange as the box distinctly shows a pink equivalent. I guess it's nice to know that I had it in hand at one point though, eh? The next thing to comment on here is the articulation, which has always been a real triumph of the Make Toys Seeker mold and remains one of the areas where it can trump a lot of the competition in Masterpiece style. Things like double jointed elbows and knees are most welcome of course, as is the ankle tilt and the much celebrated waist swivel going on here. That said, I've never been a major fan of how the cockpit section on the chest is visually broken when the waist is turned, and as with previous versions of this design, I do wish that the whole waist section locked into place a little bit better than it actually does. Still, this is on the whole a very fun, if slightly fiddly toy to pose, and I'm happy to report feels very sturdy and solid to boot, with tight joints and good tolerances all round. You can even pose the wings a bit should you wish, although that was the one area that did need tightening up just a smidge on my copy. On the whole then, I'm quite a fan of what Make Toys have done here. It's maybe not the uber-tuned neon realness of the character as seen on screen, but it is a very attractive interpretation of that all the same, and looks exceptionally striking in your Masterpiece Decepticon ranks. It's also a welcome addition to the Make Toys Seeker lineup in robot mode, and makes me glad that I decided to give the design at least one more go. But there's still more to talk about yet, as now it's time to get him transformed up into his jet mode. Transformation done, and nothing too concerning to report here. In fact, it's one that I still enjoy doing despite owning this mold many times over now, as it remains very fluid but still satisfying in how it all clips together come the end result. Perhaps the only bit that is likely to raise an eyebrow is the likelihood of the nose cone section popping off during conversion, something that's very hard to avoid unless you know the specific route to take when going through the motions. But on the whole, this remains one of the more graceful third-party transformation schemes that I can think of in recent memory. And it leaves you with a very strong looking jet form to boot, to the point where you could almost fool yourself into thinking that this was an official effort for how well it all comes together. Not to mention it's incredibly striking, and with the dark green and white sections now having all but vanished, you really get a sense of how vibrant that main block green really is. It's an eye-piercing look, but one I am truly here for. Of course, it's a huge departure from the character's look from the cartoon, with that Cybertronian alternate form nowhere to be seen here, but as a reworking of an existing Earth mode mold, it's really a very nice job indeed. The paint and finish on offer are really nicely done, and overall the presentation of the jet mode is top notch in my opinion. There's also precious little kibble to grumble about, and if anything I'd say that Make Toys has provided as clean a look as can be expected from a Masterpiece styled Seeker, certainly more so than some of the competition. In fact, probably my only real nitpick here is the folding rear fins, which move about without the ability to lock into position, meaning that they require a fair bit of readjustment during handling. Still, it's a minor quibble on what is otherwise an excellent alternate form, and one that looks simply stunning when decked out in such a gorgeous colour. In terms of gimmicks, you can swap out the main null rays for the shortened missile tip should you prefer, giving the jet mode a bit of a different look overall. Some may not like the parts forming solution employed here, but it's an option at least. Of course, if you opt to keep the null rays in place, then you can apply the blast effect pieces in this mode too, so that's a bit of fun. Otherwise though, that's about it, leaving the main appeal of this form as its good looks more than anything. Really though, there's a lot to like about Acid Swarm in general, and as a rather niche repaint of a character who has a split second of screen time in a cartoon from almost 4 decades ago, I think that Make Toys have really done a fine job here, all things considered. It's also great to see the company putting out new product again, and even if it is just a repaint, it's a blummin' nice one, making this a very definite toot. Now, as already mentioned, you'll find a link to TF Source's site in the video description below, so be sure to check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and Redbubble store, so be sure to take a look at those if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts on this toy. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me. So thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. TTFN.